The morning Cole Harlan found 5 women hanging from his uncle's gate. He had 2 choices: walk away and live, or cut them down and face the most powerful man in the territory. When he felt a pulse beneath Cole's skin and saw the burn marks declaring Morrison's land, he knew cutting those ropes meant war. But some battles choose you before you choose them. I'm about to tell you how one man's act of mercy became the bloodiest siege Dust Valley ever witnessed. Stay with me till the end and drop a comment about where you're watching from. I'd love to know how far this story travels. The sun hadn't yet broken over the eastern ridge when Cole Harlan guided his horse down the narrow trail leading to his late Uncle Jeremiah's cabin. October frost clung to the sagebrush, and his breath formed small clouds in the cold morning air. He'd been riding since before dawn, eager to reach the property he'd inherited 3 months ago, but hadn't yet had time to visit. The letter from the territorial clerk had been simple enough: 160 acres of good grazing land, a sturdy cabin, and water rights to Willow Creek. After 5 years of working other men's cattle, Cole finally had something of his own. The valley opened before him like a forgotten promise. Mist pooled in the hollows between hills, and somewhere in that gray veil stood the cabin where Jeremiah had lived his last 20 years as a hermit. Cole had barely known his uncle, just remembered him as a quiet man who'd attended exactly 3 family gatherings before disappearing into the wilderness for good. The old man had died alone, found by a traveling preacher who'd happened upon the cabin seeking shelter from a storm. Cole shifted in his saddle, adjusting the weight of his Colt .45 against his hip. It was a habit born from years of driving cattle through hostile territory where Apache raids and bandits were as common as rattlesnakes. But this morning felt different. The silence pressed against him like a physical thing, too complete, too absolute. Even the birds had stopped singing. His horse, a sturdy bay mare named Dusty, snorted nervously as they descended the final slope toward the cabin. Cole could see it now through the thinning mist, a solid structure of fitted logs with a stone chimney, exactly as the clerk had described. But something else stood before it, dark shapes that didn't belong in the pastoral scene he'd imagined. "Easy girl," Cole murmured, though his own pulse had begun to quicken. As he drew closer, the shapes resolved into something that made his blood run cold. 5 figures hung from a hastily constructed gallows at the gate, a rough crossbeam supported by 2 posts that hadn't been there when Jeremiah was alive. The bodies swayed slightly in the morning breeze, dressed in torn fabric that might have once been fine dresses. Cole's first instinct was to turn around. This was none of his business. Whatever had happened here, getting involved would only bring trouble. But as he sat frozen in his saddle, staring at the macabre scene, he noticed something that changed everything. The nearest figure, a woman with long black hair, had frost on her lips. Frost that moved ever so slightly. She was breathing. "Jesus Christ," Cole whispered, spurring Dusty forward. He leaped from the saddle before the horse had fully stopped drawing his knife as he ran. Up close he could see the women more clearly, 5 of them all young, all bearing the telltale marks of violence. Their faces were swollen, their necks ringed with rope burns, but as he pressed his fingers to the black-haired woman's throat, he felt it a pulse weak but steady. The ropes were new, the knots hastily tied. These women had been hung recently, maybe within the hour. But whoever had done it had been sloppy or perhaps intentionally cruel. The drop hadn't been enough to break their necks. They were suffocating slowly. Cole didn't hesitate. He cut the first rope, catching the black-haired woman as she fell. She was lighter than he expected, her body cold but not yet stiff. He lowered her gently to the ground and moved to the next, a redhead, whose fierce expression remained even in unconsciousness. One by one he cut them down: a blonde woman who looked barely 20, a dark-haired girl with sharp features, and an older woman with graying hair, who might have been their mother. It was only after he'd laid the last one on the ground that Cole noticed the signs. Wooden boards hung around each woman's neck. Words burned into the wood with a hot iron: "This land belongs to Morrison. Judge Nathaniel Morrison." Even out here 40 miles from the nearest town, Cole knew that name. Morrison controlled half the territory through a combination of legal manipulation and outright intimidation. He owned the largest ranch, the only bank, and had the territorial governor's ear. If Morrison had done this, Cole had just signed his own death warrant by cutting these women down. But they were breathing. All 5 of them, against all odds, were still breathing. Cole made his decision. He couldn't leave them here to die, and he couldn't take them to town, not if Morrison was involved. The cabin would have to do. One by one, he carried them inside his arms, aching by the time he'd moved the last one. The cabin's interior was much as he'd expected, sparse but clean, with a large main room, a stone fireplace, and two smaller rooms in the back. Jeremiah had left it well stocked with blankets, medical supplies, and enough food to last weeks. Cole built up the fire first, knowing warmth was crucial. Then he began the delicate work of removing the ropes from their necks. The burns were severe, the skin raw and bleeding in places. He'd seen hung men before, had even witnessed a legal execution once in Amarillo, but this was different. This was attempted murder disguised as frontier justice. The black-haired woman stirred first. Her eyes snapped open, dark eyes full of terror, and she tried to scream, but only a rasp emerged from her damaged throat. "Easy," Cole said, holding up his hands. "You're safe. I cut you down. You're in my uncle's cabin." She stared at him, her hand going to her throat. When she felt the rope was gone, some of the panic left her eyes, replaced by confusion. "Don't try to talk," Cole said, offering her a cup of water. "Your throat, it needs time." She accepted the water, gratefully wincing as she swallowed. The others were beginning to stir now, soft groans and gasps filling the cabin. Cole moved between them, offering water, adjusting blankets, trying to provide what comfort he could. The redhead was next to fully wake. Unlike the first woman, her eyes blazed with fury rather than fear. She tried to sit up immediately, her hands clenched into fists. "Morrison," she croaked the single word like gravel in her throat. "He did this?" Cole asked, though he already knew the answer. She nodded, then pointed to the others with a shaking hand. The meaning was clear. Morrison had done this to all of them. By noon, all 5 women were conscious, though none could speak above a whisper. Cole had learned their names through gestures and scratched words on a piece of paper. The black-haired woman was Clara, the redhead Ruby, the blonde Sadie, the sharp-featured one, Violet, and the older woman Grace. They were not related by blood as he'd first assumed, but by something else, something they were reluctant to reveal even through writing. It was Clara who finally told him, her voice barely audible, but her words clear, "We were his property." The word hung in the air like smoke from the fire. Property. In 1882, slavery had been illegal for nearly 20 years, but Cole knew there were other forms of bondage. Debt peonage, forced marriage trafficking, the frontier, had its own dark rules, especially for women without protection. "Morrison claimed to own you?" Cole asked. Clara nodded, then painfully wrote more details on the paper. Morrison ran a special kind of business. He brought women from back east, promising them work as teachers, seamstresses, or housekeepers. Once they arrived, he claimed they owed him for transportation, lodging, and food debts that could never be repaid. He kept them in a compound outside town, forcing them to work in his saloon, or worse. The law looked the other way because Morrison was the law. "We ran," Ruby whispered, her voice fierce despite its weakness. "3 nights ago, we had evidence." She pointed to Grace, who slowly reached into her torn dress and pulled out a small leather pouch. Inside were documents, contracts, ledgers, names and dates. Records of Morrison's trafficking operation, including payoffs to local officials. Cole studied the papers, his jaw tightening. This was enough to destroy Morrison, but only if it reached the right authorities. The territorial marshals maybe, or federal investigators. But Morrison would never let that happen. He'd already tried to kill these women once. When he learned they'd survived, "He'll come," Clara whispered, as if reading his thoughts. "When he finds out we're alive, he'll come." Cole stood pacing to the window. Outside, his uncle's land stretched peaceful and quiet, but he knew that peace was an illusion. By cutting down those women, he'd involved himself in something that would likely get him killed. The smart move would be to saddle up and ride away, leave the women with supplies and wishes for good luck. But Cole had never been particularly smart when it came to doing what was right. "Then we'd better be ready," he said, turning back to face them. This cabin's solid, and Jeremiah was paranoid enough to stock it like a fortress. If Morrison wants a fight, we'll give him one. The women exchanged glances, surprise evident on their faces. They'd expected him to abandon them, probably had experienced enough abandonment to expect nothing else. "Why?" Violet managed to ask, her voice thin but curious. "Why help us?" Cole thought about it for a moment, then shrugged. My mother raised me with a simple rule: you see someone in trouble, you help. Doesn't matter if it's convenient or safe. You help. He paused, then added, besides, any man who'd hang women like livestock isn't a man who should be walking free. Grace wrote something and showed it to him. He has 20 riders, maybe more. Then we'd better make sure we're ready for them, Cole replied. He moved to the cabinet where Jeremiah had kept his guns. His uncle might have been a hermit, but he'd been a well-armed hermit. 2 rifles, a shotgun, 3 pistols, and enough ammunition to hold off a small army. Can any of you shoot? Ruby raised her hand, immediately followed more hesitantly by Clara and Violet. Sadie shook her head, but Grace wrote, I can reload. Fast. Good enough, Cole said. He began checking the weapons, cleaning and loading them with practiced efficiency. We'll need to board up some of these windows, set up firing positions. The cabin's got good sight lines, and there's only one real approach, unless they want to climb down the cliff behind us. As he worked, he told them about himself, partly to pass the time, partly to ease their obvious tension. He'd been born in Texas, raised by his mother after his father died in the war. Started working cattle at 14, had been doing it ever since. Jeremiah was his mother's brother, a man who'd returned from the war, changed, seeking solitude in the mountains. Never married him. Sadie whispered the first word she'd spoken. Never found a woman who could tolerate me long enough, Cole said with a wry smile. Turns out spending 10 months a year on cattle drives doesn't make for a stable home life. The afternoon wore on as they prepared. The women, despite their injuries, insisted on helping. Ruby and Clara helped him board windows, leaving slots for firing. Violet organized the ammunition, her quick mind calculating angles and distances. Grace and Sadie worked on creating bandages and preparing medical supplies, knowing they'd likely need them. As the sun began to sink toward the western peaks, Cole stood watch at the front window. The women had grown stronger throughout the day, their voices returning slowly, though still hoarse. They'd also begun to share more of their stories. Clara had been a schoolteacher in Philadelphia, lured west by an advertisement for educated women to teach in frontier towns. The position had seemed legitimate, the correspondence professional. It wasn't until she'd arrived and found herself in Morrison's compound that she'd realized the truth. Ruby had come from Boston, the daughter of Irish immigrants seeking opportunity in the growing Western territories. She'd been promised work as a seamstress in Morrison's hotel. Instead, she'd found herself forced to work in his saloon serving drinks, and worse, to men who saw her as just another commodity. Sadie's story was the hardest to hear. She'd been married at 16 to a man who'd sold her to Morrison to pay off gambling debts. She'd been with Morrison the longest 3 years of captivity that had nearly broken her spirit. It was Grace who'd kept her going. Grace herself had been a widow traveling west with her teenage daughter to start over. Morrison had taken them both, though her daughter had died trying to escape the previous winter. Grace had stayed biding her time, collecting evidence, waiting for the right moment. Violet had been a telegraph operator, one of the few women in the profession. She'd been hired to work in Morrison's office handling his correspondence. That position had given her access to his records, his secrets. She'd memorized account numbers, names, dates, a walking encyclopedia of Morrison's crimes. We tried to escape before, Clara said, her voice stronger now, as evening approached. Twice. The first time he caught us before we'd gone a mile. The punishment. She trailed off and none of them elaborated. The second time we made it to town, the sheriff brought us back, said we were thieves that we'd stolen from Morrison. No one would listen to us. This time was different, Ruby added. We had the evidence. We thought if we could reach the territorial capital, find someone who wasn't in Morrison's pocket. But he caught up to you, Cole finished. Grace nodded, then wrote, he said hanging was a mercy, said we could have burned instead. Cole's jaw tightened. He'd known men like Morrison, men who used power like a weapon, who saw other people as things to be owned and used. The war had been full of them wearing uniforms on both sides. He'd thought the frontier might be different, but evil, it seemed, was universal. Well, he failed, Cole said. You're alive and you've got his secrets. That makes you dangerous to him, more dangerous than any gun. As if in response to his words, Dusty whinnied outside. Cole moved to the window, peering into the gathering dusk. At first he saw nothing, then movement on the ridge, a rider watching the cabin. Company, he said quietly. The women immediately moved to their assigned positions, taking up the weapons he'd distributed. Their transformation was remarkable, from victims to fighters in a heartbeat. Morrison had underestimated them, and that would be his mistake. The rider sat motionless for several minutes, then turned and disappeared over the ridge. A scout, Cole realized. Morrison would know by now that the women had survived, that someone had helped them. He was gathering information, planning his attack. "He'll come at dawn," Clara said with certainty. "He likes the symbolism justice delivered with the rising sun." "Then we should get some rest," Cole said. "I'll take first watch." But none of them slept much that night. They sat in the main room, the fire burning low, and talked in quiet voices. The women shared more stories, not just of their captivity, but of their lives before. Clara spoke of her students in Philadelphia, the joy of watching young minds discover the world. Ruby talked about her family's shop in Boston, the smell of fresh bread from the bakery next door. Sadie, gaining confidence, described the farm where she'd grown up, the apple orchards that bloomed white in spring. Grace wrote stories she couldn't yet speak aloud about her daughter, about the dreams they'd shared of starting a dress shop in San Francisco, about the music box her daughter had carried west, the only thing of value they'd owned. Violet shared her fascination with codes and messages, how she'd learned telegraphy from a sympathetic operator who'd seen her quick mind and steady hand. She'd been one of the youngest operators in the country, proud of her skill and independence. Cole found himself sharing 2 stories of cattle drives, of storms on the plains, of the time he'd helped deliver a baby in a wagon train when the nearest doctor was 3 days away. He talked about his mother, her strength after his father's death, how she'd run their small ranch alone until disease took her 2 winters ago. "Is that why you came here?" Sadie asked. "Because you lost your home." "Partly," Cole admitted, "but also because I was tired of working for other men, following other people's rules. Thought maybe out here I could build something of my own." "And instead you found us," Clara said with a slight smile, the first he'd seen from any of them. "Maybe that's not instead," Cole replied. "Maybe that's part of it. Building something worthwhile isn't just about land and cattle. It's about people, too." The night deepened, and Cole took his position by the window. The moon was nearly full, casting silver light across the valley. Everything seemed peaceful, but he knew it was the peace before a storm. Morrison would come, and when he did, it would be with overwhelming force. Around 3 in the morning, Ruby relieved him at watch, insisting he get some rest. Cole dozed in a chair by the fire, his guns within easy reach. He dreamed of his mother, of her weathered hands and kind eyes, of her voice saying, "You help Cole, no matter what you help." He woke to Ruby's hand on his shoulder, her whisper urgent, "They're coming." The eastern sky was just beginning to lighten, a faint gray line on the horizon. Cole moved to the window and saw them riders moving down the trail in single file. He counted 15, then 20, then stopped counting. Morrison had brought a small army. "Positions," Cole said quietly. The women moved with surprising calm, taking their places at the windows. Grace stationed herself in the center of the room with ammunition and medical supplies. Each of them had transformed overnight. The fear was still there, but it had been tempered into determination. The riders stopped just outside rifle range, spreading out in a semicircle around the cabin. Cole could see Morrison now sitting tall on a black horse, his silver hair catching the early light. Even from this distance, the man radiated authority and cruelty in equal measure. "Hello in the cabin," Morrison's voice carried clearly in the still morning air. "I know you're in there, and I know you have my property. Send out the women, and you can ride away. This doesn't concern you." Cole looked at Clara, who shook her head firmly. None of them would go willingly, not after what they'd endured. "I'm afraid I can't do that," Cole called back. "These women are under my protection now." There was a pause, then Morrison laughed, a cold, harsh sound. "Your protection, boy, do you have any idea who I am?" "I know exactly who you are," Cole replied. "You're a trafficker and a would-be murderer, and you're not getting these women." "I own them," Morrison roared, his composure cracking. "They signed contracts. They owe me money. The law is on my side." "The law," Ruby shouted, her voice still hoarse but full of rage. "You are the law, Morrison. You've bought every badge for 100 miles. Morrison's attention shifted to the window where Ruby stood. "Ah, the Irish whore finds her voice. I should have cut your tongue out months ago." "You should have made sure we were dead," Clara called out. "But you failed Morrison. just like you're going to fail now." The judge's face darkened. "I offered you mercy, boy. Remember that." He raised his hand and his men began to advance. "Hold," Cole said quietly to the women. "Let them get closer." The riders moved forward slowly, confidently. They'd expected perhaps one man defending the cabin, maybe two. They hadn't expected what came next. "Now," Cole said. The cabin erupted in gunfire. Cole's rifle cracked, sending the lead rider tumbling from his saddle. Ruby's pistol barked twice, catching another man in the shoulder. Clara's rifle boomed, and a third rider clutched his leg, screaming. Violet, calm and methodical, picked off a fourth with a clean shot to the chest. The attacking force scattered, seeking cover behind rocks and trees. They returned fire bullets thudding into the cabin's thick logs, shattering what glass remained in the windows. "Stay low!" Cole shouted, moving from window to window, firing carefully, making each shot count. The battle raged as the sun climbed higher. Morrison's men tried to rush the cabin twice, and twice they were driven back. Sadie, despite her lack of shooting skills, proved invaluable. She spotted targets, called out positions, and helped Grace reload weapons with quick, sure hands. A bullet grazed Cole's shoulder, tearing through his shirt and leaving a burning line of pain. Grace was there immediately, pressing a bandage to the wound even as he continued firing. "They're trying to flank us," Violet called out, spotting movement to their left. Cole shifted position, catching two men trying to approach from the side. His shot sent them scrambling back to cover, but he knew they couldn't hold forever. Morrison had too many men, and eventually they'd run out of ammunition. Then he smelled smoke. "Fire!" Sadie screamed, pointing to the back of the cabin where flames were beginning to lick at the walls. Morrison's men had circled around to the blind spot and set the cabin ablaze. It was a smart move, forced them out into the open where they'd be easy targets. "We need to put it out," Cole said, but even as he spoke, he knew it was hopeless. The fire was spreading too fast. "No," Clara said firmly. "We use it." She grabbed one of Jeremiah's oil lamps, lit it from the spreading fire, and hurled it out the window. It shattered against a tree where three of Morrison's men were hiding, sending them running from the spreading flames. Ruby caught on immediately, grabbing burning pieces of wood and throwing them at the attackers' positions. The dry brush caught quickly, creating a wall of fire between them and Morrison's men. "You're just making it worse," Morrison shouted. "You'll burn with that cabin." "Then we all burn together," Grace shouted back, her voice cracking but defiant. The smoke grew thicker, making it hard to breathe, harder to see. But it also provided cover. Cole realized what Clara had seen: the smoke and flames were actually protecting them, making it impossible for Morrison's men to aim accurately. "The root cellar," Cole said, suddenly remembering. Jeremiah dug a root cellar. It connects to the creek bed. He'd found it while exploring earlier a tunnel his paranoid uncle had dug as an escape route. It would be tight, but they could make it. "Go," he told the women. "I'll hold them off." "We go together or not at all," Clara said firmly. Before Cole could argue, they heard new sounds. Horses, many of them, and voices shouting commands. But these weren't Morrison's men. "U.S. Marshals, everyone drop your weapons." Through the smoke, Cole could see riders in dark coats, badges glinting in the firelight. Federal marshals, at least a dozen of them, surrounding Morrison's men. "It's about damn time," Violet said with a slight smile. Then, to Cole's surprise, she added, "I sent a telegram before we escaped. To the federal prosecutor in Denver. Told him everything, including when and where Morrison would likely catch us." Cole stared at her. "You planned this?" "I hoped," Violet corrected. "I hoped we'd survive long enough for them to arrive." Outside, Morrison was shouting, "These are my men. I'm a territorial judge. You have no authority here." "Judge Morrison," a stern voice replied, "I'm Marshal Thompson. We have warrants for your arrest on charges of human trafficking, kidnapping, attempted murder, and corruption. You and your men will surrender immediately." "This is ridiculous," Morrison spluttered. "These women are thieves. They stole from me." Clara stepped out of the burning cabin, the evidence pouch held high. "We stole nothing but proof of your crimes, Morrison." The other women followed, supporting each other. Their faces blackened with smoke, but their heads held high. Cole came last, his rifle still ready, but pointed at the ground. Marshal Thompson, a weathered man with sharp eyes, took the pouch from Clara and examined its contents. His expression grew darker with each page he read. Judge Morrison, he said finally, you're under arrest. Men disarm them all. Morrison's men, caught between the burning cabin and federal marshals, had no choice but to surrender. One by one, they dropped their weapons and raised their hands. But Morrison himself wasn't finished. As a deputy approached to arrest him, the judge pulled a hidden derringer from his coat. Time seemed to slow as he aimed it at Clara, his face twisted with rage. Cole moved without thinking. His rifle came up and fired in one smooth motion. The bullet caught Morrison in the shoulder, spinning him around. The derringer flew from his hand and he fell to his knees, clutching his wound. That's for the ropes, Cole said quietly. The marshals quickly secured Morrison, who was cursing and threatening everyone in sight. But his words were empty now. His power was broken. Marshal Thompson approached Cole and the women. We'll need statements from all of you, but first let's get you somewhere safe. That cabin's not going to last much longer. Indeed, Jeremiah's cabin was now fully engulfed flames, reaching toward the morning sky. Everything Cole had inherited was turning to ash. But as he looked at the 5 women standing beside him, alive, free, defiant, he realized he'd gained something far more valuable. You saved us, Sadie said softly, touching his arm. We saved each other, Cole corrected. As the marshals led Morrison and his men away, Grace approached the judge. She pulled something from her pocket, a small music box, tarnished and worn. This was my daughter's, she said, her voice clear despite the damage to her throat. She died trying to escape you. Her name was Emily. She was 17. Morrison wouldn't meet her eyes. I want you to remember her name, Grace continued. In whatever cell they put you in for however many years you have left, I want you to remember that Emily Hartford died because of your greed. And I want you to know that her mother survived to see you brought to justice. She turned away from him, then leaving him with the weight of that name, that truth. The sun was fully up now, warming the valley despite the October chill. The fire had spread to some of the surrounding brush, but the marshals were working to contain it. Cole stood with the women, watching his inheritance burn, feeling strangely at peace with it. What will you do now? Marshal Thompson asked him. You've lost your property. The land's still here, Cole said. I can rebuild. We could help, Clara said suddenly. The others nodded agreement. Cole looked at them in surprise. You want to stay? After everything that happened here. Morrison tried to break us here, Ruby said. Tried to kill us here, but we survived here. We fought back here. This place doesn't belong to him anymore. It belongs to us. All of us, Grace added, looking at Cole. If you'll have us. Cole thought about it for a moment, then smiled. Well, I suppose I could use the help. None of you happen to know anything about cattle, do you? We can learn, Violet said. We've learned harder things. Marshal Thompson cleared his throat. There's also the matter of a reward. Morrison had a federal bounty on him, $5,000. It's yours if you want it. $5,000. More than enough to rebuild to start over properly. Split 6 ways, Cole said. These women earned it more than I did. Can't split it if we're all partners, Clara pointed out with a slight smile. And so it was decided. As the marshals led their prisoners away and the cabin's last timbers collapsed into glowing embers, 6 unlikely partners stood in Dust Valley planning a future none of them could have imagined just 24 hours before. The ropes that had nearly killed them had, in a strange way, bound them together. They were no longer victim and rescuer, no longer strangers thrown together by circumstance. They were something new, something stronger. They were family. The weeks following Morrison's arrest passed in a blur of legal proceedings and hard labor. While the marshals built their case in the territorial capital, Cole and the women remained in Dust Valley, living in tents provided by Marshal Thompson while they cleared the debris of the burned cabin. The October winds grew colder, and the first snows dusted the peaks, reminding them that winter was coming fast. Cole had expected the women to leave once they'd given their testimonies, to return east or head to California, anywhere but this valley that had nearly been their grave. Instead, he found them each morning at first light working alongside him, their hands blistering as they hauled charred timbers and cleared foundation stones. You don't have to do this, he told Clara one morning as she struggled with a particularly stubborn beam. The reward money's yours whether you stay or go. She paused, wiping soot from her forehead, leaving a dark streak across her skin. Where would I go, Cole? Back to Philadelphia. To explain to everyone how I was fool enough to believe a lie. She shook her head. No, this is home now. We've bled for this land. That makes it ours. Ruby, overhearing, added with her characteristic fire. Besides, someone needs to make sure you build the new cabin right. Men left alone tend to forget things like proper windows and decent floors. The truth was, Cole was grateful for their presence. Not just for the help, though, 6 pairs of hands made the work go faster, but for the company. The valley felt less empty with their voices filling it, their laughter still rare but growing more frequent, echoing off the ridges. They'd established a routine quickly. Grace and Sadie handled the cooking and organized their supplies, turning the meager provisions into meals that somehow satisfied. Violet kept meticulous records of everything they spent, everything they'd need, creating order from chaos with her precise mind. Ruby and Clara worked alongside Cole on the heavy labor, neither complaining despite hands more accustomed to different kinds of work. It was during the second week as they were laying new foundation stones that the first signs of trouble appeared. 3 riders approached from the north, moving with the deliberate pace of men who wanted to be seen coming. Cole recognized the lead rider immediately. Sheriff Jim Brennan from Cedar Falls, the nearest town, and the seat of Morrison's former power. Get the rifles, Cole told Ruby quietly. She nodded, moving casually toward the tent where they kept the weapons. Brennan stopped his horse just outside what would have been the cabin's front door, his weathered face unreadable beneath his wide-brimmed hat. The 2 deputies with him were younger, nervous-looking, their hands hovering near their guns. Harlan, Brennan said by way of greeting. Ladies. Sheriff Geet, Cole replied, not stopping his work. Something we can do for you. Heard about the excitement you had here, federal marshals and such. Brennan spat tobacco juice to the side. Thought I should come see how our new neighbors were settling in. We're managing fine, Clara said, stepping forward. Cole noticed she'd positioned herself where she could grab the pistol hidden beneath a canvas tarp. Brennan's eyes fixed on her, and something cold flickered in them. You're the school teacher. Clara, isn't it, Morrison spoke of you often. I'm sure he did, Clara replied evenly. I hope you found his replacement more to your liking. The sheriff's jaw tightened. Judge Morrison was a respected man in these parts, built this territory up from nothing. Some folks think what happened to him was unjust. Some folks, Ruby emerged from the tent rifle in hand but pointed at the ground, were just the ones who were taking his money. One of the deputies shifted in his saddle hand, moving toward his gun. Cole stepped forward, placing himself between the women and the lawmen. Is there a point to this visit, Sheriff? Because we've got work to do. Brennan smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Just wanted to make sure you understood something. The federal boys might have taken Morrison, but this is still our territory, our town. Might be best if you and the ladies considered settling somewhere else. Somewhere more welcoming. Are you threatening us? Violet asked, her voice calm, but with an edge sharp enough to cut. Warning, Brennan corrected. Morrison had friends, powerful friends. They're not happy about what happened. Can't guarantee your safety if you stay. Cole set down the stone he'd been holding and straightened to his full height. Sheriff, let me make something clear. This is my land, legally inherited. These women are my partners, legally recognized. We've broken no laws. If anyone tries to drive us off or harm us, they'll find we're not as easy to kill as Morrison thought. And if something happens to us, Marshal Thompson will know exactly where to look. You think the Federals care about what happens out here? Brennan laughed. They got their big arrests, their headlines. They won't be back. They will if I ask them to, Grace said quietly, speaking for the first time. Everyone turned to look at her. My late husband's brother is Senator Hartford of Connecticut. I've already written to him about what happened here. He's very interested in the territorial government's failure to prevent Morrison's crimes. I'm sure he'd be equally interested to hear about continued harassment from local law enforcement. Brennan's face went pale. You're bluffing. Grace walked to their supply tent and returned with an envelope. This is his response delivered yesterday. Would you like to read it? He's particularly interested in investigating which local officials might have been complicit in Morrison's trafficking operation. The sheriff's hand tightened on his reins. For a moment, Cole thought he might do something stupid. Then Brennan forced another smile, tipped his hat, and said, No need for all that. Just being neighborly. You folks take care now. As the three riders departed, Cole looked at Grace with new respect. "Your brother-in-law is really a senator." "Was," Grace said softly. "He died 2 years ago, but Brennan doesn't need to know that. The letter is from my cousin in Hartford, thanking me for informing her of Emily's death." Ruby laughed, a bright sound in the autumn air. "Grace, you devious woman, I didn't know you had it in you." "We all have hidden depths," Grace replied with a small smile. Morrison learned that too late. The encounter with Brennan marked a shift in their situation. Word spread quickly through the valley and into Cedar Falls that the women of Dust Valley were not to be trifled with. Some of Morrison's former associates still glared at them when they went to town for supplies, but none dared act on their resentment. As October gave way to November, the new cabin began to take shape. It was larger than Jeremiah's original, with 3 bedrooms instead of 2 and a kitchen that Grace and Sadie had designed together. Cole had wanted to build it exactly as it had been, but the women had other ideas. "We're not rebuilding the past," Clara told him one evening as they worked by lantern light to finish framing the roof before the next storm. "We're building a future. That requires something new." The first snow came early, catching them with only half a roof. They worked through the night, all 6 of them nailing boards in place as white flakes swirled around them. By dawn they were exhausted, but victorious, the cabin finally weatherproof. It was that morning, as they sat around the fire eating breakfast, that Sadie surprised them all by singing. Her voice, still rough from the rope burns but growing stronger, filled the cabin with an old hymn her mother had taught her. One by one, the others joined in, even Cole, though he only knew half the words. Morrison's trial was set for December, and they all knew they'd have to testify. The prospect hung over them like a storm cloud, dampening spirits whenever it was mentioned. But Marshal Thompson, who visited regularly to check on them, assured them it would be quick. "The evidence is overwhelming," he told them during one visit. "Morrison's own records condemn him. Your testimony is just to confirm what the papers already prove." "Will he be there?" Sadie asked quietly. "In the courtroom." "Yes," Thompson admitted. "But he'll be in chains and there will be guards. He can't hurt you anymore." "It's not the hurting I'm worried about," Sadie said. "It's the seeing, having to look at him again." Clara took her hand. "We'll all be there. You won't face him alone." The marshal studied them for a moment, then said, "You know, in all my years doing this job, I've rarely seen witnesses as brave as you ladies. Most people would have run far away by now." "We did run," Ruby reminded him. "It didn't work. Fighting back, that worked." As November progressed, they settled into the rhythms of frontier life. Cole taught them to ride properly, to shoot with accuracy, rather than desperation to read the weather signs that could mean the difference between life and death in winter. In return, they brought their own skills to the partnership. Clara organized a school of sorts, teaching not just the basics, but literature and history to anyone in the valley who wanted to learn. 3 families with children lived within riding distance, and soon their parents were bringing them twice a week for lessons. Ruby proved to have a talent for working with horses, gentling even the most skittish animals with patience and a soft voice. She started breaking wild mustangs they caught in the box canyon, building a small herd that would be valuable come spring. Violet established a communication system with other ranches, using her telegraph knowledge to create a signal network with mirrors and flags. It was primitive but effective, allowing them to warn each other of storms, fires, or trouble. Grace and Sadie transformed the cabin into something more than just shelter. They made curtains from fabric bought in town, created a garden plot that would bloom come spring, and established a smokehouse for preserving meat. Under their hands, the rough frontier dwelling became a home. One evening, as they sat around the fireplace after dinner, Cole found himself watching them all with a strange feeling in his chest. These women who had arrived at his gate as victims had become something entirely different. They were survivors, yes, but more than that. They were builders, creators, fighters. "What are you thinking about?" Clara asked, noticing his distant expression. "Just wondering what my uncle would think of all this," Cole said. "He came out here to be alone to escape the world. Now his land has become this." "Do you think he'd disapprove?" Grace asked. Cole considered it, remembering the few times he'd met Jeremiah. The man had been quiet, wounded by whatever he'd seen in the war, but not unkind. "No," he said finally. "I think he'd understand. Sometimes you don't choose your family, sometimes it chooses you." The peace of the evening was shattered by the sound of horses approaching fast. Cole grabbed his rifle and the women quickly armed themselves, but it was Marshal Thompson who rode into view, his horse lathered with sweat from hard riding. Morrison escaped, he said without preamble. Killed 2 guards and disappeared. We think he's heading this way. The words hung in the air like a physical presence. Sadie made a small sound of fear, and Grace pulled her close. When? Cole asked. 2 nights ago. We've been tracking him, but he knows this territory better than we do. Lost his trail in the Badlands. He'll come here, Clara said with certainty. He blames us for everything. He won't run until he's had his revenge. Thompson nodded grimly. That's what we figured too. I've got men coming, but they're a day behind me, maybe 2. So we're on our own, Ruby said, checking her rifle. I'll stay, Thompson offered. 7 guns are better than 6. 8, said a new voice from the doorway. Everyone turned to see a stranger standing there, a woman in men's clothing with short-cropped dark hair and a face marked by hard living. She held a rifle with easy familiarity. Who are you? Cole demanded, his gun swinging toward her. Name's Kate, the woman said. Kate Morrison. I'm his wife. Or was until he sold me to a brothel in Mexico 3 years ago. She smiled coldly. Heard he was in trouble. Came to watch him hang. But if he's escaped, well, I'd be happy to help send him to hell personally. The revelation stunned them all into silence. Morrison had a wife, one he'd trafficked. Like the others, Grace was the first to recover. How did you escape? Killed the man who owned me, Kate said simply. Took his horse and guns. Been hunting Nathaniel ever since. Heard about what happened here. Figured this was my chance. How do we know you're telling the truth? Violet asked suspiciously. Kate pulled up her sleeve, revealing a brand burned into her forearm. Morrison's brand, the same one some of the women bore. He marked me first, she said. His test case before he started his business. I was 17 when he married me, thought I was the luckiest girl in the world. Took him 6 months to show his true nature. Clara lowered her gun. Then you're welcome here. We could use another fighter. Thompson looked uncertain, but didn't object. They spent the rest of the night preparing, setting up defenses, planning for an attack that could come from any direction. Cole divided them into watches, 2 at a time. He paired himself with Kate for the first watch, wanting to learn more about this unexpected ally. How long were you in Mexico? He asked as they stood in the darkness scanning the valley. 2 years, Kate replied. Would have been longer, but the man who bought me got careless. Thought a broken woman couldn't be dangerous. Morrison seems to make that mistake a lot, Cole observed. Kate laughed bitterly. Nathaniel never saw women as people. We were possessions tools, entertainment. Even when he married me, I was just another acquisition. A pretty young thing to show off to his associates. Why didn't you go to the law when you escaped? With what proof a branded runaway whore against a territorial judge? She shook her head. I knew the only justice I'd get would be the kind I took myself. They stood in silence for a while, then Kate said, You're different from most men out here. How so? You helped them. No profit in it, plenty of danger. Most men would have ridden on. Cole shrugged. My mother raised me right. Mine raised me to be a good wife, Kate said. Look how that turned out. The night passed without incident, but dawn brought fresh horse tracks near the creek. Someone had been watching them. He's out there, Thompson said, studying the tracks. Testing our defenses. Let him come, Ruby said fiercely. We're ready. But Morrison was smarter than that. He didn't attack directly. Instead, as they discovered when Violet went to check their supplies, he'd poisoned their water barrel. Son of a bitch snuck in while we were watching the approaches. Cole cursed. Must have come down the cliff after all. They had backup water from the creek, but it meant someone would have to make regular trips outside the cabin's protection. Morrison was trying to wear them down, make them vulnerable. He's alone, Thompson reasoned. If he had help, he'd have attacked already. He's trying to be clever. Nathaniel was always clever, Kate said darkly. It's what made him dangerous. That afternoon, smoke began rising from the barn where they kept the horses. Ruby and Cole ran to save the animals, driving them out as flames consumed the structure. While they were distracted, a shot rang out. Sadie cried out, clutching her arm as blood seeped between her fingers. He's in the rocks, Violet shouted, firing toward the source of the shot. Grace pulled Sadie inside while the others laid down covering fire. The bullet had grazed Sadie's arm, painful, but not serious. Still, it served Morrison's purpose. They were rattled reactive instead of proactive. "We can't keep playing defense," Cole said. "We need to hunt him." "That's what he wants," Thompson warned. "To separate us, pick us off one by one." "Then we don't separate," Clara said. "We hunt him together." It was a dangerous plan, leaving the cabin defended by only Thompson and the wounded Sadie. But staying put meant letting Morrison control the fight. Cole, Clara, Ruby. Violet, Grace, and Kate moved out in formation, spreading wide but keeping visual contact. They knew Morrison was in the rocks above the cabin, but the terrain was treacherous, full of hiding places. They'd been searching for an hour when Kate suddenly stopped, her head tilted. "There," she whispered, pointing to a cluster of boulders. "I know his habits. He always goes high and to the right." They surrounded the position carefully. Cole could see disturbed gravel, a brass shell casing glinting in the sun. Morrison had been here, but wasn't anymore. "Behind you, Grace shouted. Cole spun to see Morrison emerging from a concealed position, his rifle aimed at Clara. Time slowed as Cole raised his own weapon, knowing he wouldn't be fast enough. The shot that rang out wasn't from Morrison's rifle or Cole's. Kate stood 20 feet away, smoke rising from her gun, her face expressionless as Morrison staggered, looking down at the spreading red stain on his chest. "Hello, husband," Kate said coldly. Morrison's eyes widened in recognition and fear. "Catherine, you're dead. You died in Mexico." "I got better," she replied, walking closer, keeping her gun trained on him. Morrison tried to raise his rifle, but his strength was failing. He fell to his knees, blood frothing on his lips. "You should have made sure," Kate continued. "Should have confirmed I was dead. But you never did pay attention to details when it came to your women." The others surrounded Morrison, now 5 women and 1 man, all armed, all watching him die. He looked from face to face, perhaps finally understanding what he'd created. Not victims, but warriors. "This isn't justice," he gasped. "No," Grace said quietly. "Justice would have been a trial. This is consequence." Morrison's gaze found Clara. "You ruined everything." "You ruined yourself," Claire replied. "We just survived it." With a final rattling breath, Judge Nathaniel Morrison died in the dust of the valley he'd tried to claim, surrounded by the women he'd tried to destroy. For a long moment, nobody moved. Then Kate turned and walked away, saying over her shoulder, "I'll send the marshal up." The investigation that followed was brief. Thompson wrote in his report that Morrison had been shot while attempting to murder federal witnesses. It was true enough, and no one questioned it. Kate disappeared the same day, leaving only a note that said, "Thank you for letting me finish it." The trial went forward without Morrison, his records, and the women's testimonies enough to convict his associates and free his other victims. By December, it was over. Justice served as well as it could be. Christmas Eve found them all in the completed cabin, warm and safe as snow fell heavily outside. They'd survived so much, the hanging, the siege, Morrison's final attack. They'd built not just a home, but a fortress of their own making. "What now?" Sadie asked as they sat around the fire, her arms still in a sling but healing well. "Now we live," Cole said simply. "We run cattle, breed horses, grow crops. We make this place what it should be." "Together," Clara added, and the others nodded agreement. They were an unlikely family brought together by violence but bound by something stronger choice. They'd chosen to fight for each other, to build together, to stay, when leaving would have been easier. Outside, the snow continued to fall, blanketing the valley in pristine white, covering the scars of battle, the ashes of the old cabin, the blood that had been spilled. Come spring, new grass would grow, flowers would bloom, and life would continue its eternal cycle. But for now, they sat together in the warmth of their home, 6 souls who'd found each other in the darkest of circumstances and chosen to create light. They talked and laughed, shared stories and dreams, planned for a future that once seemed impossible. The ropes that had nearly killed them were gone, but the bonds they'd forged in surviving them would last forever. In trying to destroy them, Morrison had instead created something he could never understand, a family built not on blood or law, but on courage, trust, and the unbreakable will to survive. As midnight approached, marking the official arrival of Christmas, Cole raised his glass of whiskey in a toast. "To the women of Dust Valley," he said, "the strongest people I've ever known." "To the man who cut us down," Clara countered, raising her own glass, "and stood with us after." "To those we lost," Grace added quietly, thinking of Emily and all the others who hadn't survived Morrison's cruelty. "To those we saved," Ruby said, remembering the other women freed by Morrison's fall. "To justice," Violet contributed, ever practical. "To home," Sadie finished, her voice soft but clear. They drank the whiskey, burning warm in their throats, and sat in comfortable silence as the wind howled outside. They'd earned this peace, this moment of perfect contentment. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. There would be cattle to tend, horses to train, a ranch to run. The people of Cedar Falls might never fully accept them. There would be hard winters and dry summers, struggles and setbacks. But tonight they were simply 6 people who'd saved each other, sitting by a fire in a cabin they'd built with their own hands, proof that sometimes the worst moments in life can lead to the best outcomes. If you have the courage to keep fighting and the wisdom to know when you've found something worth fighting for. The winter that followed Morrison's death was the hardest anyone could remember. By late January, snow had piled 6 feet deep in the valley, and the temperature dropped so low that water froze solid in the buckets before they could carry it from the creek to the cabin. Cole had seen rough winters in Texas, but nothing like this mountain cold that seemed to seep into your bones and stay there. They'd prepared as best they could through the fall, but supplies were running dangerously low. The trip to Cedar Falls, normally a day's ride, was now impossible with the passes blocked by snow. They were truly isolated, 6 people against the elements, with 40 head of cattle and a dozen horses depending on them for survival. "We need to move the cattle closer," Cole said one morning, ice crystals forming in his breath as he spoke. "That north pasture's too exposed. We'll lose half of them if this keeps up." Ruby bundled herself in every piece of warm clothing she owned, looking like a walking quilt pile. "I'll help. Those Mustangs I've been working with are tough enough for this weather." "It's too dangerous," Clara protested. "If something happens out there, if you get caught in a whiteout—" "Then we lose the cattle and we lose everything we've built," Cole said grimly. "Without them, we won't have anything to sell come spring. No money means no supplies, no seed for planting, no way to prove this ranch is viable." Grace looked up from where she was mending a torn blanket. "We've survived worse than winter, haven't we? Morrison couldn't break us. Neither will the cold." It took them 3 days to move the cattle, working in shifts, 2 people at a time, while the others kept the home fires burning and cared for the horses. Cole watched Ruby work with growing admiration. She had a natural way with animals that couldn't be taught, speaking to them in low, soothing tones that somehow cut through the howling wind. On the second night of the cattle drive, they lost their way in a sudden blizzard. The world became a wall of white direction, meaningless, the cold so intense it felt like being cut with invisible knives. "We need to find shelter," Ruby shouted over the wind, though she was right beside him. Cole knew she was right, but there was no shelter to be found. They were in the open valley, the cabin somewhere to the south. Or was it east? He'd lost all sense of direction in the white chaos. Then, through the storm, he heard a bell ringing steady and clear. Clara had rigged up Jeremiah's old dinner bell to the cabin's roof, and now she was ringing it, giving them a sound to follow home. "That woman's a genius," Ruby said, managing a smile despite her blue lips. They followed the sound, driving the cattle before them until the cabin's lights appeared through the snow like stars in a white sky. Violet and Sadie ran out to help them get the animals into the hastily built shelter they'd constructed near the cabin, while Grace had hot soup and coffee waiting inside. "Thought we'd lost you," Clara said quietly to Cole as he thawed by the fire, his hands so numb he couldn't hold the coffee cup without help. "You nearly did," he admitted. "That bell saved us." "We save each other," she reminded him. "That's what we do." The proximity forced by winter created its own challenges. 6 people in a cabin, no matter how well built, meant little privacy and constant interaction. Tensions that had been manageable in autumn became harder to ignore when they were trapped inside for days at a time. It started with small things. Ruby's habit of humming while she worked grated on Violet's nerves. Sadie's nightmares worse since Morrison's attack woke everyone. Grace's insistence on maintaining proper manners even in the wilderness seemed ridiculous when they were all half frozen and exhausted. The breaking point came in early February. They'd been trapped inside for a week straight due to a blizzard, and everyone's patience was worn thin. It began with an argument over the last of the coffee. "We need to ration it better," Violet said, her tone sharper than usual. "At this rate, we'll be out before the thaw." "We're already rationing everything," Ruby snapped back. "Food, wood, even the damn candles. What's the point of surviving if we're miserable the whole time?" "The point is surviving," Violet replied coldly. "Or have you forgotten what we're doing here?" "What we're doing." Ruby stood, her face flushed with anger. "What we're doing is pretending this is working when it's not. We're six strangers playing house while we slowly starve and freeze." "Ruby," Grace said warningly, but Ruby wasn't finished. "No, someone needs to say it. This was a mistake. We should have taken our share of the reward money and gone our separate ways. California, Mexico, anywhere but here." The words hung in the air like icicles, sharp and cold. Sadie started crying quietly, and Clara's face had gone pale. Cole stood up slowly. "If that's how you feel, Ruby, you're free to leave. No one's keeping you here. In this weather, that's a death sentence, and you know it. Then I guess you're stuck with us strangers a while longer." He said, his voice hard. "But make up your mind. Either you're part of this family or you're not. There's no halfway." Ruby grabbed her coat and stormed out into the snow. Clara started to follow, but Cole stopped her. "Let her cool off. She'll be back." But an hour passed, then two, and Ruby hadn't returned. The storm was getting worse, and even angry, she should have come inside by now. Cole suited up to go look for her, but Clara stopped him. "I'll go," she said. "This is between us women to sort out." She found Ruby in the barn with the horses half frozen and crying. Without a word, Clara sat down beside her in the hay. "I didn't mean it," Ruby said through chattering teeth. "I'm just so scared all the time. Scared we'll fail, scared Morrison's friends will come, scared I'll wake up and be back in that compound." "We're all scared," Clara said, putting an arm around her. "But that's why we need each other. Fear shared is fear halved." "Is that from one of your books?" "No," Clara said with a small smile. "That's from living through hell with 5 other women and coming out the other side." They returned to the cabin together to find the others had prepared a peace offering of sorts. Sadie had made Ruby's favorite cornbread with the last of their cornmeal. Grace had heated water for a proper bath, and Violet, in an uncharacteristic display of emotion, simply hugged Ruby tight. "We're not strangers," Violet said quietly. "Not anymore." That night, as the storm raged outside, they sat together and really talked for the first time about their fears, their doubts, their dreams beyond mere survival. Cole shared his worry that he wasn't strong enough to protect them all, that he'd fail them when they needed him most. Clara admitted she sometimes woke in a panic, feeling the rope around her neck. Grace spoke of Emily of the guilt she carried for surviving when her daughter hadn't. Sadie revealed her terror that she was too damaged, too broken, to ever be truly useful. Violet confessed her fear that her analytical mind, so good with numbers and plans, couldn't account for the variables of the heart. And Ruby apologized again, explaining that anger had always been easier for her than vulnerability. "We're all broken in some way," Grace said finally, "but broken things can be mended, and sometimes they're stronger for it." The reconciliation came just in time because the next morning brought new trouble. 3 men on horseback appeared at their gate, having somehow made it through the snow-blocked passes. Cole recognized one immediately, Jack Thornton Morrison's former foreman. "Thought Morrison's men were all in jail," Ruby muttered, checking her rifle. "These ones were smart enough to run when the marshals came," Cole replied. "Question is, why are they here now?" The answer became clear when Thornton called out, "Harlan, we need to talk, peaceful-like." Cole stepped onto the porch, rifle visible but not raised. "State your business, Thornton." "Winter's been hard on everyone," Thornton said. "Our families are starving. We know you've got supplies cattle. We're willing to trade." "Trade what?" Clara asked, appearing beside Cole. Thornton's smile was unpleasant. "Information, protection. See, there's others who blame you all for what happened to Morrison. They're planning something come spring. We could warn you, help you prepare. All we ask is some beef and grain to get our families through." It was Violet who responded, her voice carrying clearly through the cold air. You're lying, Thornton. If your families were starving, you'd be with them, not here. You're the ones planning something, and you're fishing to see how prepared we are. Thornton's friendly mask slipped. You always were too smart for your own good, girl. Morrison should have cut your throat instead of selling you. Get off our land, Cole said, raising his rifle. Now. This ain't over, Thornton warned. Morrison had more friends than you know. Come spring, you'll see. After they left, the group gathered inside to discuss this new threat. We should tell Marshal Thompson, Sadie suggested. Tell him what? Cole asked. That men who should be in jail made vague threats. Thompson's 3 days away in good weather, and this snow might as well be on the moon. Then we prepare, Clara said firmly. We assume they'll attack when the snow melts and plan accordingly. They spent the rest of February turning their cabin into a proper fortress. Cole and Ruby reinforced the walls, adding thick shutters that could stop bullets. Violet designed a system of alarms using wire and cans that would warn them of approaching riders. Grace and Sadie prepared medical supplies, knowing they might need them. Clara organized their ammunition and created strategic plans for different attack scenarios. The work gave them purpose, something to focus on besides the cold and their dwindling supplies. It also brought them closer together, the shared threat reminding them why they'd chosen to stand together in the first place. March arrived with a brief thaw that allowed Cole and Ruby to make a desperate run to Cedar Falls for supplies. The town received them coldly, but their money was good and they returned with enough food and ammunition to last until spring. They also brought news. Morrison's trial had made headlines back east. Newspapers were calling it the Dust Valley Uprising, and the women were being hailed as heroes by some, condemned as lawless vigilantes by others. They're making us famous, Sadie said wonderingly, reading one of the articles. Famous is dangerous, Violet warned. It means more people know where we are, what we have. She was proven right 2 weeks later when a fancy carriage somehow made it through the muddy roads to their gate. The man who stepped out was dressed like an Eastern businessman, complete with a silk vest and gold watch chain. My name is William Prescott, he announced. I represent a group of investors interested in your story. We'd like to buy the rights, turn it into a book, maybe even a stage play. Not interested, Cole said flatly. You haven't heard my offer. $5,000 plus a percentage of profits. It was more money than the ranch would make in 5 years. Cole saw the women exchange glances, saw the temptation in their eyes. That money could secure their future, make them truly independent. But it was Grace who spoke. Mr. Prescott, what happened to us isn't entertainment. It's not a story for people to gasp over while safe in their homes. Women are still being trafficked, still being hurt. If you want to help donate that money to organizations that protect women, don't profit from our pain. Prescott tried to argue to negotiate, but they stood firm. Eventually, he left, but not before warning them that others would come, that their story was too valuable to remain untold. Let them come, Ruby said defiantly. We'll send them away just like him. As March turned to April and the snow finally began to melt in earnest, they could see the damage winter had done. They'd lost 8 cattle to the cold, and one of the horses had developed a respiratory infection that required constant care. But they'd survived all of them, and that felt like a victory. It was Clara who noticed the riders first, a dust cloud on the horizon that meant multiple horses moving fast. They're coming up, she called out. And everyone knew what she meant. Thornton had made good on his threat. As the riders drew closer, they could count at least 15 men, all armed, all heading straight for the cabin. Positions, Cole ordered, and they moved with practiced efficiency. But as the riders got closer, something unexpected happened. Another group appeared from the south, riding hard to intercept Thornton's men. Cole recognized the lead rider's tall form and Silver Star Marshal Thompson with a full posse behind him. The two groups met a quarter-mile from the cabin, and even from that distance they could hear raised voices. Thornton was gesturing angrily, pointing at the cabin, but Thompson's men had surrounded his group. How did Thompson know? Sadie asked wonderingly. Violet smiled slightly. I might have sent a telegram when we were in town. Told him about Thornton's visit, suggested he might want to patrol this area come spring. The confrontation ended with Thornton and his men being escorted away by the marshals. Thompson rode up to the cabin alone afterward. Ladies Harlan, he tipped his hat, Thought you might need some help with your pest problem." "Much obliged, Marshal," Cole said. "Though we were prepared to handle it ourselves." "I'm sure you were," Thompson said, looking at their fortified cabin with approval. "But that's the thing about the law. When it works right, folks shouldn't have to handle everything themselves." He stayed for dinner, updating them on the aftermath of Morrison's operation. 23 women had been freed from various locations. All his properties had been seized and sold, with the proceeds going to his victims. "You six started something," Thompson said. "Other territories are investigating their own versions of Morrison. Your courage made a difference." After he left, they stood together on the porch, watching the sunset paint the valley gold. The threats weren't over, might never be completely over, but they'd proven they could face them. "You know what I realized," Ruby said suddenly. "We're not just surviving anymore. We're living." She was right. Somewhere between the hanging and now, they'd stopped simply enduring and started building something real. The garden Grace and Sadie had planned was already sprouting green shoots pushing through the dark soil. Clara's students would return once the roads dried. The horses Ruby had trained were strong and healthy, ready to sell or breed. Violet's careful management meant they had money-saved plans for expansion. And Cole had found something he hadn't even known he was looking for. Not just land or independence, but purpose. These women had given him that, had shown him that strength came in many forms, that courage wasn't just facing danger, but choosing to trust, to build, to stay. That evening, as they gathered for dinner, Clara raised a toast with their carefully rationed whiskey. To winter survived and spring begun. To family, Grace added, and no one argued with the term anymore. They drank, and the warmth that spread through them had nothing to do with the alcohol and everything to do with the bonds they'd forged. They'd been tested by fire and ice, by violence and isolation, and they'd emerged not just intact, but stronger. The cabin was full of laughter that night, stories and plans for the future. Ruby wanted to expand the horse operation, maybe start breeding cattle too. Violet had ideas about establishing a proper school, bringing in a real teacher to help Clara. Grace and Sadie were planning an expansion of the garden, enough to supply not just themselves, but to sell in town. Cole was thinking about acquiring more land, building the ranch into something that could support them all comfortably. They were dreams that would have seemed impossible back in October when they'd first met at the end of ropes. But now, with spring arriving and threats face down together, anything seemed possible. As the evening wore on and they began preparing for bed, Cole stepped outside for one last check of the animals. Clara followed him, something clearly on her mind. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked. "Cutting us down that morning, your life would have been simpler if you'd just ridden on." Cole thought about it, looking out over the valley that was no longer just his, but theirs. "Every choice we make changes us," he said, finally. "The man who could have ridden past you that morning, he wouldn't have been someone I could live with being. So no regrets. Not one." Clara smiled and surprised him by taking his hand. "Good, because we're going to need you for what comes next." "What comes next?" "Living," she said simply. "Really living. Not just surviving or fighting or protecting, but building something worth having. Think you're ready for that?" Cole squeezed her hand gently. "With all of you, I think I am." They stood there in comfortable silence, two people who'd found each other in the worst possible circumstances and chosen to make something beautiful from it. Inside the cabin, they could hear the others preparing for bed, the comfortable sounds of a family settling in for the night. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. There would be more threats, more struggles, more tests of their resolve. The ranch would face droughts and floods, good years and bad. Some of Morrison's allies would continue to cause trouble, requiring vigilance and strength to face down. But tonight, they were together, safe and stronger than they'd ever been apart. The ropes that had nearly killed them had become the bonds that held them together, transformed from instruments of death into connections of life. Spring was coming to Dust Valley, and with it the promise of new growth, new life, new possibilities. They would face it together, 6 souls who'd chosen each other, who'd chosen to fight not just for survival, but for something more precious, a future they could build with their own hands on their own terms together. The stars came out one by one, overhead brilliant in the clear mountain air. Cole and Clara watched them for a while longer, then went inside to join their family. The door closed behind them, shutting out the cold night air, keeping in the warmth and light they'd created together. In the barn, the horses settled for the night. In the nearby pasture, the cattle lowed softly, and in the cabin, 6 people who'd started as strangers slept peacefully, knowing that whatever tomorrow brought, they would face it together. The morning after Marshall Thompson's visit brought an unexpected gift from the heavens. Rain, gentle and steady, the kind that soaked deep into the earth and promised good growing weather. Cole stood on the porch, coffee in hand, watching the valley transform from winter brown to the first hints of spring green. The peace was deceptive, he knew. Thornton might be in custody, but men like him had friends and grudges in the frontier had a way of festering like untreated wounds. Clara joined him, her own cup steaming in the cool morning air. She'd taken to wearing men's work clothes around the ranch, practical over proper, though she somehow managed to make even rough canvas and leather look graceful. "Violet's been going through those papers again," she said. "The ones we took from Morrison's office. Finding anything. Names. Lots of names. Men who owed him money, men who owed him favors." She paused, sipping her coffee. "Men who might come looking for those debts." Cole turned to study her face. In the months since October, she'd changed. They all had. The terrified woman he'd cut down from that rope had become someone formidable, someone who could face down threats with steady hands and steadier nerves. "Let them come," he said. "We've handled worse." "Have we?" Clara asked. Morrison was one man, evil but predictable. "These names, some of them are powerful. Judges, territorial officials, even a federal congressman." Before Cole could respond, they heard hoofbeats approaching. Both tensed hands moving instinctively toward weapons, but it was only a single rider moving at an easy pace. As the figure drew closer, Cole recognized Tom Brennan, Sheriff Brennan's son. The young man looked nervous, constantly checking over his shoulder as he approached. "Mr. Harlan," Tom called out, stopping a respectful distance from the porch. "Miss Clara, I need to speak with you, all of you." Ruby emerged from the barn, rifle in hand, followed by Violet from the garden. Grace and Sadie appeared in the doorway, drawn by the voices. "If your father sent you," Cole began, but Tom interrupted. "My father's dead," he said bluntly. "Shot 3 nights ago. That's what I came to tell you." The news landed like a physical blow. Brennan had been no friend to them, but murder was serious, especially the murder of a lawman. "Who?" Violet asked, always direct. "Don't know for certain," Tom said, dismounting slowly. "But before he died, he said something. Said Morrison's books would get everyone killed. Said I should warn you." Grace stepped forward. "Your father was part of Morrison's network. Why would he warn us?" Tom's jaw tightened. "My father did things I'm not proud of, but he wasn't a killer, and when Morrison tried to make him one, when he ordered him to finish what Morrison started with you ladies, he refused. That's when things went bad between them." "Come inside," Cole said after a moment. "Tell us everything." Over coffee and Grace's biscuits, Tom laid out a story that made their blood run cold. Morrison's operation had been just one tentacle of something much larger, a network of trafficking and corruption that stretched from Mexico to Canada. His death and the seizure of his records had sent ripples of panic through this network. "They're cleaning house," Tom explained. "Anyone who might talk, anyone who might have evidence. My father thought he was safe, thought his badge would protect him. He was wrong." "And you think we're next?" Clara asked. "I know you are," Tom said. "I overheard 2 men in the saloon last night. They didn't know who I was. They were talking about finishing Morrison's business, said something about a woman named Delacroix coming from New Orleans." Violet went very still. "Madame Delacroix. You know her?" Cole asked. "Know of her." Violet corrected, her face pale. "She runs the biggest trafficking ring in the South. Morrison was supposed to be expanding her operation into the territories. If she's coming personally, she didn't need to finish. They all understood. This wasn't about revenge anymore. This was about business, about silencing witnesses who could expose a massive criminal enterprise." Tom stood to leave. "I've told you what I know. What you do with it is your choice, but if I were you, I'd run. Go to California, Oregon, somewhere they can't find you." After he left, they gathered around the table, the weight of this new threat settling over them like a shroud. "We could run," Sadie said quietly. "He's right. We could disappear. For how long? Ruby demanded. Forever, always looking over our shoulders, waiting for them to find us. Besides, Grace added, running means leaving other women in danger. How many more Morrisons are out there? How many more compounds full of trapped women? Cole had been silent, thinking. Finally, he spoke. We don't run. We finish this. How? Clara asked. We use those names Violet found. We get them to Thompson, to federal prosecutors. We expose the whole network. That's suicide, Violet said bluntly. Delacroix has resources we can't match. Money men connections. Then we need allies of our own, Cole said. He looked at each of them in turn. Are you with me? One by one they nodded. Even Sadie terrified as she straightened her shoulders and said yes. They spent the next 3 days preparing. Violet made copies of all the documents hiding sets in various locations. Clara wrote detailed accounts of everything they'd witnessed, every name they'd heard, every crime they knew about. Ruby worked with the horses, preparing them for hard riding if needed. Grace and Sadie prepared medical supplies and preserved food, knowing they might need to survive a siege. Cole rode to the neighboring ranches, the ones run by decent folk who'd had their own troubles with Morrison's corruption. The Wheelers, the Johnsons, the old German couple, the Schmidts, all agreed to help if needed, forming a loose alliance of frontier justice. On the fourth night, Violet's alarm system saved their lives. The cans rattled just after midnight, and they were up and armed in seconds. Through the windows, they could see figures moving in the darkness, at least a dozen, maybe more. They're surrounding us, Ruby whispered. Cole made a quick decision. The root cellar, now. They'd expanded Jeremiah's old escape tunnel over the winter, creating a hidden exit that emerged in a grove of cottonwoods by the creek. They moved quickly and silently, grabbing the essential supplies they'd prepared. They'd just entered the tunnel when the first fire bottle crashed through the cabin window. Within minutes, their home was ablaze, orange flames lighting up the night sky. From their hiding spot in the cottonwoods, they watched their hard work burn. Sadie was crying silently, and even Ruby's face was wet with tears. But there was no time for mourning. The Wheelers' place, Cole whispered. We go there, regroup, figure out our next move. They traveled through the darkness, staying off the main trails, grateful for the moon's light. Behind them, they could hear shouting as the attackers realized the cabin was empty. The Wheelers took them in without question, Jim Wheeler and his sons immediately setting up a watch, while his wife Martha tended to their minor injuries, cuts from branches, bruises from the hasty escape. Saw the fire, Jim said grimly. Figured it was trouble. Already sent my oldest to town to fetch the marshal. Thompson's 3 days away, Cole said. Then we hold out for 3 days, Jim replied simply. You helped us when Morrison's men were stealing our cattle. We don't forget that. Dawn brought a clearer picture of their situation. The attackers hadn't given up. Scouts were spotted on the ridges watching the Wheeler ranch. They were being hunted, and their hunters were patient. It was Clara who suggested the unexpected strategy. We don't wait for them to come to us. We take the fight to them. That's crazy, Ruby said, but there was admiration in her voice. No, think about it, Clara continued. They expect us to hide to defend. They don't expect us to attack. And we have something they don't know about Tom Brennan's information. We know Delacroix is coming. We know when and where. Violet caught on immediately. The old Morrison compound. That's where she'll set up. It's isolated, defensible, and symbolic. Cole studied the map Jim Wheeler had provided. The compound was 15 miles away, built in a box canyon with only one real entrance. It would be dangerous, but Clara was right. It was the last thing their enemies would expect. We'd need a distraction, he said slowly. Something to draw off most of their men. Leave that to us, Martha Wheeler said unexpectedly. Everyone turned to look at the usually quiet woman. The women of this valley have had enough. Sarah Johnson, Emma Schmidt, the other wives, we've all lost daughters, sisters, friends to men like Morrison. Give us a task, and we'll see it done. The plan that emerged was audacious in its simplicity. The ranch women would create a distraction in town claiming to have information about the fugitive's location. Meanwhile, Cole and his group would infiltrate the compound and capture Delacroix, using her as leverage to expose the entire network. They had one advantage: Kate Morrison's unexpected return. She appeared at the Wheeler Ranch that evening like a ghost dressed in black, armed to the teeth. "Heard you had trouble," she said simply. "Came to help." "Why?" Grace asked. Kate's smile was cold. "Delacroix was the one who bought me in Mexico. I owe her 3 years of hell. Time to collect." With Kate's knowledge of the compound's layout and Delacroix's habits, the plan became more feasible. They would strike tomorrow night when Delacroix was scheduled to arrive. The next day passed in tense preparation. Weapons were cleaned and loaded, plans were reviewed, and goodbyes were carefully not said. As dusk approached, they set out Cole, Clara, Ruby, Violet, Grace, Sadie, and Kate. 7 people against an unknown number of enemies. The distraction worked perfectly. Martha Wheeler and the other women rode into Cedar Falls claiming the fugitives had been spotted heading south toward Mexico. Most of Delacroix's advance guard took the bait, riding off in pursuit of ghosts. The compound sat in darkness when they arrived, only a few guards visible. Kate led them through a hidden entrance she'd discovered during her captivity, a narrow crack in the canyon wall that required them to move single file. They emerged in what had been the compound's garden, now overgrown and wild. Through the windows of the main house, they could see lights and movement. Delacroix had arrived. "Remember," Cole whispered, "we need her alive." They split into 3 groups. Ruby and Kate would handle the guards. Grace and Sadie would secure the evidence they knew must be in Morrison's old office. Cole, Clara, and Violet would confront Delacroix. The first part went smoothly. Kate moved like a shadow, taking down guards with quiet efficiency. Ruby covered her, ready to use her rifle if needed. Within minutes, the exterior was secure. Grace and Sadie slipped into the office through a window, immediately beginning to search for documents. What they found exceeded their expectations. Ledgers detailing the entire operation. Names of corrupt officials, routes and methods, even bank accounts. Cole, Clara, and Violet entered the main house through the kitchen. They could hear voices from the parlor, a woman's cultured tones mixing with men's rougher speech. They moved closer, weapons ready. The door burst open before they could act. One of Delacroix's bodyguards had spotted them, and suddenly the room erupted in chaos. Gunfire shattered the elegant furnishings as everyone dove for cover. Cole found himself behind an overturned table, splinters flying as bullets struck the wood. Across the room, he could see Clara pinned down behind a sofa and Violet taking careful shots from behind a stone pillar. "Surrender," a woman's voice called out. "You're outnumbered." "Count again, Delacroix?" Kate's voice came from the doorway. She stood there with Ruby, both women armed and dangerous. "Your men are down. It's just you and these 2 now." The shooting stopped. In the sudden silence, they could hear Delacroix's rapid breathing. She emerged from behind an ornate desk, a beautiful woman in her 40s with cold eyes and an elegant dress that seemed absurd in the frontier setting. "Catherine Morrison," she said, recognizing Kate. "I thought you were dead." "A lot of people making that mistake lately," Kate replied. Delacroix's remaining bodyguards looked uncertain, their guns wavering between multiple targets. The woman herself seemed to be calculating odds, looking for an escape route. "It's over," Clara said, standing slowly. "We have your records, your correspondence, everything. The federal marshals are already on their way." Delacroix laughed, a sound like breaking crystal. "You think you've won? You have no idea how deep this goes, how many powerful men depend on my services. They'll never let this come to light." "They won't have a choice," Violet said, holding up a leather journal she'd taken from the desk. "This is your personal record, isn't it? Every transaction, every official you've bribed, every girl you've sold." Delacroix's composure finally cracked. "You don't understand. If that information gets out, if those names are revealed, then justice gets done." Grace interrupted, entering with Sadie, their arms full of documents. "Finally." The sound of horses outside made everyone tense, but it was Marshal Thompson's voice that called out, "Federal marshals, everyone drop your weapons." The timing was perfect, almost suspiciously so. It turned out Tom Brennan had ridden hard to find Thompson, cutting what should have been a 3-day journey to one through dangerous shortcuts and exhaustive riding. As the marshals secured Delacroix and her men, Thompson approached Cole and the women. "You took a hell of a risk." "Seemed better than waiting to be hunted down," Cole replied. Thompson looked at the documents Grace and Sadie had gathered. His eyes widened as he recognized names. This is This is going to change everything. There are going to be arrests from here to Washington. Good, Claire said firmly. It's time. Delacroix, being led away in shackles, turned back to them. You've signed your own death warrants. These men won't forgive, won't forget. Neither will we, Ruby shot back. We'll be watching, waiting, and if any of your associates come for us, they'll find we're ready. The aftermath was swift and dramatic. The documents they'd seized led to dozens of arrests across multiple territories. The trafficking network that had operated for years in shadow was dragged into the light. Newspapers from San Francisco to New York carried the story. But for Cole and the women, the victory was bittersweet. Their cabin was gone, their home destroyed. They stood in the ruins the next day, sifting through ash and memories. We can rebuild, Sadie said quietly. We did it once. Better this time, Violet added. I've been thinking about the design, more defensive positions, better sight lines. Cole looked at them, all these incredible women who'd become his family. You still want to stay, after everything? Where else would we go? Claire asked. This is our land. We fought for it, bled for it. That makes it home. The rebuilding began immediately, but this time they weren't alone. The Wheelers, Johnsons, Schmidts, and other neighbors came to help. Men and women who'd once looked at them with suspicion now saw them as heroes. Tom Brennan surprised everyone by offering to help, working alongside them, despite the complicated history with his father. Someone needs to be sheriff, he said one day. Someone clean, not connected to the old corruption. I was thinking maybe I could do it right this time. You'd make a good lawman, Cole told him. Your father would be proud. Maybe, Tom said. Or maybe he'd just be glad someone was trying to fix what he helped break. Kate Morrison stayed for a week helping with the initial construction, then announced she was leaving. I've got my closure, she said. Delacroix is going to hang Morrison's dead. Time for me to find out who I am when I'm not hunting for revenge. Where will you go? Grace asked. West, Kate said with a slight smile. Maybe California. Always wanted to see the ocean. She left at dawn, a solitary figure disappearing into the horizon, finally free of the past that had driven her for so long. The new cabin rose faster than expected, the community effort making quick work of it. It was larger than before, with room for growth, room for hope. They added touches that made it more than just a shelter. Windows that caught the morning sun, a porch that wrapped around three sides, a kitchen large enough for all of them to work together. One evening, as they were putting the finishing touches on the main room, Clara found a package that had been delivered from town. Inside was a set of books, classics, poetry, philosophy, and a note from an anonymous donor saying simply, "For the school you're building." It's starting, Clara said wonderingly. People believe in what we're doing. The school was Violet's idea, originally expanded by Clara's vision. Not just a place to teach children, but a center for the community, a symbol that Dust Valley was about more than just survival. We'll need a teacher, Grace pointed out. We have one, Cole said, looking at Clara. Unless you've got other plans. Clara smiled. No other plans. This is what I came west to do, even if the journey was different than expected. Ruby had her own project expanding the horse operation into a proper breeding program. These Mustangs are tough smart. Cross them with good Eastern stock, and we'll have horses every ranch in the territory will want. Ambitious, Cole said. You prefer unambitious women, Ruby shot back with a grin. Not anymore, he admitted. As spring turned toward summer, life settled into new rhythms. The threats weren't gone. They still received the occasional hostile look in town, the occasional veiled threat, but they were manageable. The law, cleaned of corruption, actually protected them now. Marshal Thompson visited regularly, partly for official business, but increasingly because he was courting Martha Wheeler's widowed sister. Love, it seemed, was finding its way into Dust Valley in unexpected ways. Cole noticed it in smaller ways, too. The long looks between Clara and himself when they worked side by side. Ruby's laughter coming easier and more often. Sadie's growing confidence as she took charge of the household management. Grace's smile when she spoke of the future instead of the past. Violet's satisfaction as her plans turned into reality. One evening, as they sat on the new porch watching the sunset, Cole found himself thinking about that morning in October when he'd first seen them hanging from the gate. How different everything was now. How different they all were. Regrets? Clara asked, noticing his thoughtful expression. No, Cole said. Just thinking about how sometimes the worst moments lead to the best outcomes. Morrison meant to destroy us, Grace said. Instead, he created us. Created what? Sadie asked. This, Grace gestured to encompass all of them, the cabin, the land. This family, this strength, this future. Ruby raised her glass of whiskey. To Morrison, then. May he rot in hell knowing he failed. To us, Violet corrected. To surviving and thriving despite him. They drank, and the whiskey burned warm in the cooling evening air. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. There were crops to plant, horses to train, a school to build, a community to strengthen. But tonight, they were together, safe and stronger than they'd ever imagined possible. The sound of horses approaching made them all tense briefly, hands moving to weapons that were never far away. But it was just Tom Brennan wearing his new sheriff's badge, making his evening rounds. Everything quiet, he called up. Peaceful as Sunday, Cole replied. Tom tipped his hat and rode on, and they relaxed back into their chairs. The vigilance would never fully leave them. It was the price of their freedom, but it no longer dominated their lives. I've been thinking, Clara said suddenly, about that offer from Prescott, about telling our story. We turned him down, Ruby reminded her. We turned down his version, sir, Clara corrected. But what if we told it ourselves, wrote it ourselves, the truth, not some sensationalized drama? Why? Violet asked. Because there are other women out there who need to know it's possible to fight back, to survive, to build something after trauma. Our story could help them. Grace nodded slowly. Emily would have wanted that, to help others. We could donate any proceeds, Sadie suggested, her voice stronger than it had been months ago, to organizations that help women escape situations like ours. Cole listened to them plan, these remarkable women who'd transformed trauma into purpose, fear into strength. He thought about his mother again, about her simple rule, you help. They were living that rule now, not just for each other, but for women they'd never meet. Lives they might save simply by sharing their truth. As night fell and they moved inside, Cole paused at the door, looking back at the valley bathed in moonlight. Somewhere out there were more Morrisons, more Delacroix, more evil that needed confronting. But here in this place they'd claimed and defended good had won. The cabin door closed behind him, shutting out the night, keeping in the warmth and light. Inside, his chosen family was settling in for the evening. Ruby cleaning her rifle while humming Violet working on ledgers. Grace and Sadie preparing tomorrow's bread. Clara writing what might become the first chapter of their story. This was what victory looked like. Not grand gestures or final battles, but quiet evenings in a home you'd earned, surrounded by people who'd stood with you through hell and chosen to stay for whatever came next. The summer that followed brought unexpected prosperity to Dust Valley. The story Clara had begun writing found its way to a publisher in Boston through Marshall Thompson's connections, and suddenly there were orders for 1,000 copies, then 5,000. But it wasn't the money that mattered most. It was the letters that started arriving, dozens of them, from women who'd found hope in their story. Cole was mending fence posts one morning in late June when he saw the rider approaching. Something about the way the man sat his horse military straight, despite civilian clothes, set off his instincts. He kept working, but positioned himself closer to where his rifle leaned against the fence. The man stopped a respectful distance away, removing his hat to reveal gray hair and a face marked by authority. Mr. Harlan, my name is Colonel James Worthington, retired. I'm looking for Grace Hartford. Cole's hand moved imperceptibly closer to his weapon. What's your business with her? I served with her husband in the war. I've been searching for her since I heard about what happened to Emily. Grace appeared on the porch, having heard her name. The color drained from her face when she saw Worthington. James, my God, is it really you? The reunion was tearful. Worthington had been her husband's best friend, had been there when he died at Antietam. He'd promised to look after Grace and Emily, but lost track of them when they'd moved west. I failed you, he said, sitting at their kitchen table, coffee growing cold in his hands. I should have found you sooner, should have protected you both. You couldn't have known, Grace said gently. Morrison was careful, legitimate on paper. Even I didn't see the trap until it was too late. Worthington stayed for 3 days, and his presence brought out stories Grace had never shared. Her husband had been a major, a good man who'd struggled with what he'd seen in the war. His death had left her not just widowed, but financially ruined his family, having disowned him for marrying beneath his station. "You deserve better," Worthington said on his last evening. "Both of you did." "I found better," Grace replied, looking around at the others. "Not the way I expected, but better nonetheless." Before leaving, Worthington pulled Cole aside. "There's something you should know. Morrison wasn't working alone in the government. There are others men in Washington who profited from his operation. They're nervous now, afraid of what else might come to light." "Let them be nervous," Cole said grimly. "They might do more than worry. These are powerful men with much to lose." Worthington handed him a card. "If you need help, send word. I still have friends in uniform men who remember what honor means." July brought heat that shimmered off the valley floor and made the horses sluggish. It also brought an unexpected visitor in the form of a teenage girl who appeared at their gate one evening, dusty and exhausted, leading a limping horse. "Please," she gasped. "I need help. They're coming." Ruby caught the girl as she swayed while Cole scanned the horizon for pursuers. "Who's coming?" he demanded. "My father," the girl managed. "He sold me, like he sold my sister 3 years ago. But I ran." The name she gave them sent chills through the room. Samuel Morrison, the judge's younger brother. "We didn't know he had a brother," Violet said, already checking weapons. "He stayed back east mostly." The girl who gave her name as Anna explained after Grace had given her water and food. "But when Nathaniel died, he came to claim his properties, including the women Nathaniel had papers on." "Those women were freed," Clara said firmly. "Not all of them," Anna said. "Some had already been sold south to Mexico and beyond. Samuel has been collecting them and new ones. He says he's going to rebuild what Nathaniel started, but bigger." They gave Anna shelter, but they all knew this meant trouble. Samuel Morrison would come for her and for them. They'd killed his brother, destroyed his empire. This was personal now. The attack came 3 nights later, but they were ready. Violet's alarm system gave them warning, and the fortifications they'd built held strong. What they hadn't expected was the size of the force, 30 men at least professional gunmen rather than local thugs. The battle was fierce but brief. Cole and the women had learned to fight as a unit, each covering the other's weaknesses. Ruby's sharpshooting from the roof kept the attackers at bay, while Clara and Violet laid down systematic fire from the windows. Grace and Sadie had turned the root cellar into a medical station ready for wounded while also keeping Anna safe. But it was the arrival of unexpected allies that turned the tide. Tom Brennan appeared with a posse of townspeople, men and women who'd decided that Dust Valley had seen enough violence from outsiders. The Wheelers, Johnsons, and Schmidts were there along with others who'd previously stayed neutral. Caught between two forces, Samuel Morrison's men scattered. Morrison himself, a thin man who looked like a pale shadow of his brother, was captured, trying to flee. "You bitches destroyed everything," he screamed as Tom arrested him. "My brother's legacy, our family's fortune." "Your brother's legacy was pain and death," Grace said quietly. "It deserved to be destroyed." The federal marshals arrived 2 days later to take Morrison and his surviving men. Marshal Thompson looked tired but satisfied. "This keeps happening. I might just station a permanent office here," he said dryly. Anna chose to stay with them despite having relatives in California she could have gone to. "You're the first people who ever fought for me," she explained. "I want to learn to be like you." She proved to be a quick student, eager and determined. Ruby took her under her wing, teaching her to ride and shoot. Clara included her in lessons, discovering the girl had a sharp mind that had been denied education. Grace and Sadie mothered her, helping heal wounds that went deeper than skin. August brought a different kind of challenge. The success of Clara's book had drawn attention from Eastern newspapers, and reporters began arriving wanting to interview the heroes of Dust Valley. Most were respectful, but some came looking for sensation rather than truth. One particularly persistent journalist from New York, a man named Harrison, wouldn't take no for an answer. He lurked around town asking questions, trying to dig up dirt that would make a more salacious story. It was Violet who dealt with him in her own particular way. She invited him to the ranch for an exclusive interview, then proceeded to give him exactly what he wanted: A story so outrageous, so clearly fabricated that no reputable paper would print it. She spoke of midnight rides with ghost cowboys, of secret gold mines, of romance with mysterious European princes. Harrison left in frustration, realizing he'd been played. "No one will believe the truth after that," Ruby laughed. "That's the point," Violet said with satisfaction. "Our real story is out there in Clara's book. We don't owe these vultures anything more." September arrived with golden light and the promise of harvest. The garden Grace and Sadie had planted was abundant. The horses Ruby had trained were sold for good prices, and the school Clara had started was thriving with 15 regular students. It was during the harvest celebration, a community gathering they'd organized at the ranch, that Cole realized how much had changed. The same people who'd once whispered about the Morrison women now brought dishes to share, helped with chores, included them in the fabric of valley life. He was watching Clara teach a group of children a dance when Tom Brennan approached. "You've done something remarkable here," the sheriff said. "We survived," Cole replied. "That's all." "No, it's more than that. You've changed this whole valley, made people believe things could be different, better." Tom paused. "Made me believe it." The celebration lasted late into the night with music from a fiddle player and stories around a bonfire. Cole found himself sitting with Clara as the party wound down, watching the others. Ruby was laughing at something Anna had said. Violet was engaged in intense discussion with the schoolmaster from the next town. Grace and Sadie were serving the last of the pie to grateful neighbors. "This is what we were fighting for," Clara said softly. "Not just survival, but this, community, belonging." "Was it worth it?" Cole asked. "Everything we went through," Clara considered. "Ask me that question differently. If you could go back to that morning knowing everything that would follow, would you still cut those ropes?" "Every time," Cole said without hesitation. "Then yes, it was worth it." October arrived, marking 1 year since that fateful morning. They gathered at sunrise, all of them standing where the old gate had been. No one spoke for a long moment, remembering. Finally, Grace broke the silence. "A year ago, we were dead. Morrison had killed us even if our hearts were still beating. But Cole gave us a second chance, and we gave each other the strength to take it." "We should mark this day," Sadie suggested. "Not as a celebration, but as a remembrance." "A rededication," Clara added, "to keeping the promises we made to ourselves and each other." They planted a tree that day, an oak that would grow strong and tall, its roots deep and branches wide. Each of them added a shovelful of earth, even Anna, who'd become part of their chosen family. That evening, as they gathered for dinner, a writer approached with urgent news. President Arthur had signed new legislation targeting human trafficking, inspired in part by the revelations from Morrison's network. Clara's book was being cited in Congress as evidence of the need for federal action. "We did that," Ruby said wonderingly. "We actually changed things." "The fight's not over," Violet reminded them. "There are still other Morrisons out there." "But now there's also us," Grace said, "and others like us inspired to fight back." The weeks that followed brought a steady stream of correspondence. Women wrote asking for advice, for help, for hope. Some even came in person seeking sanctuary or guidance. The ranch became an unofficial way station for women escaping bad situations, a place where they could rest, recover, and rebuild. One such woman was Maria, who arrived in November with her 2 young children fleeing an abusive husband who tried to sell her to pay gambling debts. She spoke little English, but pain and fear were universal languages. Grace, who'd picked up Spanish during her captivity, became Maria's primary comfort. Watching her gentle patience with the frightened woman and her children, Cole saw how their trauma had transformed into purpose. "We're becoming what we needed," Clara observed one evening. "A safe place, a refuge." "Is that what we want?" Cole asked. "To turn the ranch into some kind of sanctuary." "Why not?" Ruby asked. "We've got the room, the resources, and God knows we've got the experience." Violet, ever practical, was already working on logistics. "We'd need more buildings, a proper system for intake and placement, legal protection too." "And funding," Grace added. "The book royalties," Clara suggested. "They're more than we need for ourselves." It was settled that simply. What had begun as a cattle ranch inherited by a lonely cowboy had evolved into something unprecedented, a working ranch that also served as a refuge for women in danger. Winter approached with less fear than the previous year. They were better prepared, better supplied, and no longer alone. The community that had rallied to their defense against Samuel Morrison remained supportive, and their reputation had spread far enough that even criminals thought twice before troubling them. One snowy evening in early December, as they sat around the fire planning expansions for spring, Anna asked a question that had been on all their minds. What about love? What about families of your own? The question hung in the air. These women who'd been property, who'd been violated and nearly killed, had every reason to never trust again. Yet Cole had noticed the looks, the possibilities that flickered in quiet moments. Ruby laughed first, breaking the tension. Who says this isn't a family? You know what I mean, Anna pressed with teenage stubbornness. Love isn't off the table, Clara said carefully. But it has to be on our terms now. No one will ever own us again. Besides, Violet added with a rare smile, we're rather busy changing the world. But Cole noticed Clara's hand finding his under the table, a quiet acknowledgement of something growing between them. He'd seen similar connections forming Tom Brennan's increasingly frequent visits that always seemed to involve talking to Ruby, the correspondence Violet maintained with a lawyer in Denver, who shared her passion for justice, the way Grace had begun smiling when Colonel Worthington's letters arrived. Even Sadie, the most traumatized of them all, had begun to bloom under the attention of the Schmidt's eldest son, a gentle giant named Otto, who helped with the heavy work and never pressed for more than she was ready to give. Christmas Eve brought an unexpected gift. Kate Morrison returned riding in through heavy snow with a companion, a woman named Elizabeth, who'd escaped from a brothel in San Francisco. Heard you were taking in strays, Kate said with her characteristic directness. Figured you might have room for 2 more. You're staying, Grace asked, surprised. If you'll have me. Turns out revenge is less satisfying than building something better. They welcomed her, of course. Kate's skills and experience would be invaluable in protecting and training the women who sought their help. As 1883 dawned, they stood together on the porch, watching the sun rise over their valley. The second cabin was nearly complete, the school was thriving, and 3 more women had found sanctuary with them. We should write another book, Clara said suddenly. Not about us this time, but a guide. How to escape, how to fight back, how to rebuild. A handbook for survival, Violet agreed. For more than survival, Grace corrected. For triumph. Cole looked at these remarkable women who'd become his family, his purpose, his home. A year and a half ago, he'd been a drifter with an inheritance he didn't particularly want. Now he was part of something larger, something important. You know what I realized, he said. That morning when I found you, I thought I was saving you. But you saved me too. From a life that would have been safe, but empty. We saved each other, Clara said, repeating words from long ago. That's what family does. As winter deepened around them, they worked and planned and dreamed. The women seeking refuge were taught not just to hide, but to fight. The children in the school learned not just letters, but courage. The community that had once feared them now looked to them for leadership. Spring would bring new challenges, Cole knew. There would always be men like Morrison systems that preyed on the vulnerable, but there would also always be people like them ready to stand up to fight back, to cut the ropes that bind. One evening, as the snow fell softly outside and the house filled with the voices of women learning they were stronger than they'd ever imagined, Ruby raised a toast. To the ropes meant to kill us, she said, and the bonds they became instead. They drank, and the warmth spread through them like hope itself. Outside the oak they'd planted stood bare but strong, waiting for spring, its roots growing deeper with each passing day. In the morning, there would be work, always work. Letters to answer women, to train children, to teach a ranch, to run a mission to fulfill. But tonight, they were simply together, a family forged in fire and tempered by trust. Cole stepped onto the porch for his nightly check, and Clara joined him as she often did now. They stood in comfortable silence, watching snow fall on the valley they'd claimed through blood and courage. Any regrets? She asked their old ritual. Only one, Cole said. She looked at him in surprise. That I didn't find you all sooner. Clara smiled and took his hand. We found each other exactly when we needed to. Not a moment before, not a moment after. A sound from inside drew their attention. Laughter, multiple voices joined in shared joy. The house that had once sheltered one hermit now overflowed with life, with purpose, with hope. "Listen to that," Clara said softly. "That's the sound of victory." Cole squeezed her hand gently. She was right. Every laugh, every lesson taught every woman who arrived terrified and left strong. These were victories that no violence could undo. They went back inside to join their family, leaving the night to settle peacefully over Dust Valley. The ropes that had once hung at the gate were long gone, burned or rotted away. But what they'd built in defiance of those ropes would last for generations. In the weeks that followed, more women arrived, and with them, more stories of survival and resistance. The network they'd inadvertently created began to formalize with safe houses established in other territories, all connected by the women who'd passed through Dust Valley. Maria, who'd arrived so frightened, began teaching Spanish to the other women, creating another tool for communication and escape. Her children played with the local kids who came for school, their laughter a testament to resilience. Elizabeth, whom Kate had brought, proved to have a talent for forgery that had helped her escape. She turned this skill to creating new identities for women who needed to disappear completely to start fresh where their pasts couldn't follow. One day in late January, Marshall Thompson arrived with news that sent ripples through their community. "There's going to be a congressional hearing," he announced, "about trafficking, about corruption in the territories. They want you to testify." "All of us?" Grace asked. "All of you? In Washington?" The prospect was daunting. Washington, D.C. was a world away from Dust Valley, a place of power and politics where their hard-won safety might mean nothing. "It's dangerous," Cole said immediately, "exposing themselves like that in public record." "It's necessary," Clara countered. "If we don't speak, who will?" They debated through the night, weighing risks against potential impact. Finally, it was Anna who settled it. "You gave me courage when I had none," she said. "Now maybe you can give it to a whole nation of women who need it." The decision was made. They would go to Washington, tell their story to Congress, and try to change not just territories, but the entire country. Preparations began immediately. Violet researched every congressman who would be present, their histories, and voting records. Claire refined her testimony, making sure every word would have maximum impact. Ruby and Kate focused on security planning for threats that might emerge. But life at the ranch continued too. The early February thaw brought unexpected warmth, and with it a chance to expand the garden to repair winter damage to plan for the future. It was during this thaw that Cole finally said what had been building between him and Clara for months. They were working side by side repairing fence posts when he stopped and turned to her. "When we get back from Washington," he said, "I want to talk about something." "Talk now," Clara said, setting down her hammer. "I want to marry you, Wubbed," Cole said simply. "Not own you, not control you, but stand beside you as your husband if you'll have me." Clara was quiet for a long moment, and Cole feared he'd misread everything. Then she smiled that rare, brilliant smile that transformed her face. "I was starting to think you'd never ask," she said. They were married 2 weeks later before leaving for Washington. It was a simple ceremony in the cabin with their chosen family as witnesses. Tom Brennan, now officially courting Ruby, performed the ceremony in his capacity as sheriff. Grace stood as Clara's matron of honor, tears streaming down her face. "Emily would have loved this," she whispered. The wedding was more than just a union between two people. It was a statement that love could exist after trauma, that trust could be rebuilt, that choosing each other daily was more powerful than any forced bond. Your thoughts will help us create meaningful stories. And if you want to hear more powerful healing stories like this, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, click the bell icon so you don't miss any new episodes. And most importantly, share this video with people who need a little hope today. Thank you so much for your time. We hear you, we listen to you, and we are honored to tell these stories for you.